Hello, friends, fellow travelers in the dead of night. I am your storyteller tonight, here to walk with you through the last quiet hours of a long day. I know many of you find these stories as a gentle lullaby, an escape from the chaos to fall asleep. So, before we start our journey into the darkness of the story, let's find ourselves a comfortable, warm place. Relax your body, take a deep breath, and exhale slowly. Feel the heaviness of your eyelids, the peace gradually spreading. If you love stories like this, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so we can meet again in the next nights. Well, where are you hearing me from? And what time is it where you are? Let me know in the comments. Now, let's really relax. All the noisy sounds of the outside world seem to have receded, leaving only my voice and the overwhelming silence. But sometimes silence hides the scariest things. Like a knock on the door, for example. This is not an ordinary knock on the door, but the knocking on the door always starts at 3:17 a.m. Not 3:15, not 3:20 either. Exactly 3:17. It was as if whatever was hiding behind that wall was following a terrifyingly meticulous schedule. Our story tonight begins with Nam, a young man who has just moved to a new place, bringing with him the hope of a peaceful start. When Nam first set foot in on Duong Apartments, he almost couldn't believe his luck. After many years of being crowded into old dormitories with walls as thin as paper and a plumbing system that is as shaky as a fussy ant, this place appears like a paradise on earth. The lobby sparkles with marble floors, modern abstract paintings elegantly hang on the walls. The hallways are clean and softly lit by recessed ceiling lights that never flicker. Nam's apartment, 1108, is located on the 11th floor with large floor-to-ceiling glass windows, embracing the shimmering cityscape at night. The broker went on and on about the building's unique soundproofing design, ensuring absolute quiet between apartments. At that time, Nam found this particularly attractive. Who doesn't want a private space, not disturbed by noise from neighbors? The first days passed smoothly. Nam arranged his furniture, hung a few favorite paintings on the wall, and started working from home in a small office overlooking the city. The neighbors seemed polite but distant, the type of people who only nod when sharing the elevator but never initiate a conversation. Ms. Lon, the building manager, a middle-aged woman with an austere face but sharp eyes, looked at Nam with a somewhat strange look when he said he would take apartment 1108. But Nam quickly dismissed it, thinking it was just normal curiosity. It all started on Wednesday night. Knocking sound. At first, it was very light, so light that Nam thought he had imagined it. 3 light knocks. Stop for a moment. Then another 3 hours. The sound was dry, like knuckles tapping on hardwood. He turned over, pulled the blanket higher, and quickly fell back asleep. The next morning, he completely forgot about it. The next night, the sound returned. This time it was a little louder, clearer, and a little more urgent. Nam woke up with a start and looked at the luminescent wristwatch on the bedside table. 3:17 a.m. He lay still, holding his breath, listening. The knocking sound seemed to come from the living room wall, the wall shared with apartment 1106. Perhaps the neighbor had a somewhat odd schedule, or had insomnia. It's annoying, but not alarming. Nam told himself so. Friday night, when the knock rang again on time, Nam decided to find out. He gently got out of bed, his bare feet walking smoothly on the cool wooden floor. The sound continued as he approached the living room wall. 3 knocks, stop. 3 more. He pressed his ear to the cold wall surface. Immediately, the knocking stopped. The absolute silence was overwhelming, heavy, and tense. Nam stood waiting, his ears still pressed against the wall, his heart pounding in his chest. A few minutes passed, nothing happened. He breathed a sigh of relief. Perhaps it was just a coincidence. But the moment he turned back to the bed, the knocking started again. This time, he decided to ignore it, trying to force himself to fall asleep, even though the knocking sound kept repeating like a haunting chorus. The next morning, Nam was determined to meet his neighbor. He stood in front of apartment 1106, mentally preparing a friendly but firm speech about noise at night. He knocked on the door. There was no reply. He tried again in the evening, still no movement. The next day, he met Mrs. Lon in the hallway and asked about the people in room 1106. Mrs. Lon looked at him with a puzzled expression. Is that apartment 1106? There's no one there. It's been empty for several months. Drums. Nam was surprised. So, what about the previous tenant? Mrs. Lon shrugged, her eyes slightly averted. Ah, that boy moved away suddenly. He broke the contract. I heard it was for some personal reason. She spoke in a rather vague voice, then quickly changed the subject. Nam's heart started beating faster. If the apartment is empty, where does the knocking sound come from? That night, he placed the phone in the living room, turned on recording mode, and pointed the microphone toward the wall. The knocking came again, right on time, at 3:17 a.m. Nam lay on the bed, eyes open, staring at the ceiling, feeling his heart beating wildly in his chest as he listened to the rhythmic, steady knocking sounds. It lasted for nearly an hour before falling silent. The next morning, he nervously checked the recording. Nothing. There were only hours of silence, occasionally mixed with the very soft creaking sound of the expanding building. He tried again the next night, with a different recording app, placing the phone closer to the wall. The result remains the same. Absolutely no sound was recorded, except for the sound of his own steady breathing coming from a bedroom. It was as if that tapping sound existed only in his own perception, or it was too subtle for ordinary devices to record. Entering the second week at Duong apartment, Nam began to become more sensitive to his surroundings. The quietness of the building, which once made him feel comfortable, now became stuffy and heavy. He noticed that the sounds in his apartment were behaving strangely. The sound of conversations in the hallway sometimes echoed in a distorted, unnatural way, while the noise from the street on the 11th floor was sometimes heard clearly and incomprehensibly. He asked Ms. Lonigan about the unique soundproofing design that the broker had mentioned. She only briefly explained the special materials and complex wall structures, but her explanation did not satisfy Nam at all. The feeling of being watched began to appear. At first, it only came when he was near the living room wall, a prickly feeling on the back of his neck, as if eyes were following his every move. Gradually, that feeling spread throughout the apartment. Nam found himself starting to avoid the living room, especially at night. He moved the TV into the bedroom and always kept the living room door tightly closed. But the knocking continued, night after night, always at 3:17 a.m. Nam started searching for information about Duong Apartments online. Most of the results are just brochures or real estate listings. But then, hidden deep in the archives of a local news site, he found a small news story from about 3 years ago, talking about unusual complaints from residents. Nothing specific, just vague references to anomalous sound phenomena and noise of unknown origin. The article also mentioned that some tenants broke their leases after just a few months of moving in. The building's management board said it was due to difficulties in adapting to urban life. Nam's sleep is getting worse and worse. Dark circles appear clearly under the eyes. Colleagues on video meetings asked if he was okay. You're not okay at all. The knocking has become more complex, changing both in rhythm and intensity. Sometimes it came in a rush, faster as he approached the wall, as if excited by his presence. Other times it's slow, deliberate, sound by sound, methodically causing goosebumps on Nam's skin. He began to think that there was some intelligence behind these sounds, a consciousness trying to communicate in its own way. On the third week, Nam met an old lady in room 1112 in the elevator. When he boldly mentioned the strange knocking on the door, the old lady's face suddenly turned pale. She asked him which apartment he lived in, and when Nam said 1108, she pressed her floor button repeatedly until the elevator door slammed between them. After that time, the old lady always tried to avoid Nam in common areas. Nam tried sleeping with earplugs, but somehow the knocking sound still penetrated. He tried sleeping pills, but they only put him in a drowsy, half-asleep state, where the knocking seemed to echo throughout his body. His dreams were invaded by it too. Images of thin hands with long fingers tapping on glass, or sometimes tapping on the inside of his skull. He often woke up startled, panting, sweat soaking the back of his shirt, and feeling the fishy taste of copper in his mouth. One particularly bad night, after nearly 2 hours of continuous knocking, Nam couldn't stand it anymore. He rushed out to the living room, punched the wall hard, screaming for it to stop. The building's supposedly perfectly soundproofed walls should have kept his rage contained. But the next morning, Mrs. Lon called, her face serious, talking about someone complaining about the noise from his apartment last night. When Nam tried to explain the knock on the door, Mrs. Lon looked at him with strange eyes, half pity and half suspicion, then suggested that maybe city life isn't suitable for everyone. Nam became obsessed with that wall. He examined every square inch of it, looking for cracks, irregularities. He pressed his ear against the wall at different times of the day, listening for any sounds. One time, he thought he heard breathing, not from the other side, but seemingly from within the wall itself, as if the material of its construction were inhaling and exhaling. His rational mind screamed that it was impossible, but doubt had begun to crack his perception of reality. On the 5th week, he found that message. While cleaning the skirting near the living room wall, Nam noticed tiny scratches on the paint. Looking closer, he realized they formed words. The words written in Vietnamese are squiggly and so small that they can be easily missed if you don't pay close attention. You want to go in. Nam gently stroked the inscription with his finger. Who left it? When? Previous tenant? Or someone more ancient? He searched the rest of the apartment, but couldn't find any other messages. That same day, Nam went to the city library to learn about the history of the land where the Duong building was built. The results sent chills down his spine. The apartment complex was built on the site of an older structure, a psychiatric hospital that was demolished in the 1970s. The hospital specialized in experimental treatments for serious mental disorders. Some patients are recorded to have died during treatment, although records are vague on the details. The land was abandoned for decades before being developed into this luxury apartment complex. Returning to the apartment, Nam clearly felt the atmosphere had changed. It was thicker, as if charged with something he couldn't name. The temperature near the wall is several degrees lower than the rest of the room. When he placed his hand on the wall, his fingertips felt a tingling sensation like being pricked by needles. That feeling gradually spread up his arm. That night, Nam stayed awake waiting for the knock on the door. At exactly 3:17 a.m., it started. But this time is different. Stronger, faster. The rhythm also changes. For quick knocks, stop. For quick knocks. He turned on the light and walked closer to the wall. For the first time, he talked directly to it. What do you want? His voice sounded strange in his ears, as if it came from somewhere else. The tapping stopped immediately. Absolute silence reigned again, deeper than any silence he had ever experienced, as if all the sounds in the world had been sucked dry. Then, softly at first, but getting louder and louder, came a sound that Nam could only describe as scratching, like the sound of nails scratching on the inside of the wall. Nam stepped back, his heart beating like a war drum in his chest. The scratching sound chased after him, moving horizontally along the wall, following his every step. It stopped in the middle of the wall. Then a single powerful thud rang out, shaking the paintings on the wall. Nam ran into the bedroom and locked the door, even though he knew it was a meaningless act. Whatever is on the other side of the wall is clearly not limited by physical barriers. He huddled in the corner of his room for the rest of the night, eyes glued to the bedroom wall, waiting for the scratching to start there. The morning light, the birds singing outside the window, and the sounds of the waking city from below seemed to make Nam's fears irrational. He checked the living room wall, saw no marks, no evidence of last night's horrifying events. He began to seriously question his mental health. Did you imagine it all? Are you experiencing auditory hallucinations? Lack of sleep can cause paranoia and cognitive disorders, you know that. But the sheer clarity of his experiences made him doubt the psychological explanation. He made an appointment with the doctor. The doctor prescribed anti-anxiety medication and recommended psychotherapy. Nam did not tell the doctor about the knocking or scratching sounds. There was a feeling that told him that it would lead to more serious interventions that he was not ready to accept. The medicine soothed his senses and helped him sleep somewhat, but did not stop the noises. They became even more diverse and complex. Tapping, scratching, now even whispers too soft to understand. Nam started sleeping on the sofa in the common area of the building, lying that he had insomnia when the security guard asked about him. The noises didn't follow him there, which both relieved and worried him. They are attached to your apartment, especially to that wall. He started looking for a way to break the lease. The fine would be huge, but his sanity seemed worth more. When he reviewed the contract, he discovered an unusual clause that he had previously overlooked. Tenant acknowledges the unique acoustic characteristics of the building and agrees that anomalous acoustic phenomena are not grounds for termination of the lease. The wording is strangely specific, almost as if the management knew exactly what the tenants might be going through. On week 7, Nam met an older man in the laundry room who had lived in the building since it opened. When Nam cautiously broached the subject of unusual sounds, he looked at him quizzically for a long time before speaking. He said that the building was designed by an architect with unique ideas about space and sound. Walls aren't just walls. They contain sound channels that can conduct sound in unpredictable ways. But what he said next sent chills down Nam's spine. Sometimes, he believes, these channels open up to dimensions that do not belong to our physical world. Nam laughed it off at that time, but his words kept haunting him. That night, as he lay in bed waiting for the familiar knocking sound, he asked himself, what if there's something right about his theory? What if those sounds aren't coming from another apartment, or even from inside the wall, but from somewhere else entirely? Some adjacent reality, pressing against the thin membrane between worlds. The knock came on time. Nam lay perfectly still, listening not only to the sounds but also to the silences between them. And in those silences, he began to recognize a pattern. Not just random noise, but information, a message being transmitted in some kind of code that he couldn't completely decode. He got out of bed and walked toward the wall, fear giving way to a strange, detached curiosity. The knocking stopped as he approached. He pressed his palm flat against the wall surface. "I'm listening," he whispered. For a few heartbeats, nothing happened. Then he felt it. There was a slight pressure on his hand, as if someone on the other side had also placed their palm on top of his, separated only by the thickness of the wall. The pressure increased. The wall between them seemed thinner, more permeable. His fingertips sank slightly into the wall's surface, which suddenly felt soft and pliable. Nam jerked his hand back, his heart beating wildly. The wall returned to normal again, solid and motionless. But now you understand. It doesn't try to communicate. It's trying to get through. I'm writing this from a hotel across town. Nam left behind most of his possessions, taking with him only what could fit into a single suitcase. Mrs. Lawn did not seem surprised when he announced that he was breaking the lease contract. She didn't even mention the fine. "This place isn't for everyone, my dear," was all she said, a knowing look in her eyes. Nam learned about the people who lived in apartment 1108 before him. There have been 7 in the past 3 years. No one stays for more than 2 months. He found contact information for one of them, a woman currently living in another province. Their conversation was very brief. All she said was, "Don't let it in. No matter what it promises, never let it in." Nam doesn't know what exists on the other side of that wall. He didn't know what it wanted or why it chose him. Chose everyone who had ever lived in that apartment. But you know this, some barriers are meant to exist intact. Some spaces are not allowed to connect. Last night, in his hotel room, nearly 20 kilometers from On Duong Apartments, Nam woke up at exactly 3:17 a.m. From the wall next to his bed, 3 light knocks sounded. Stop for a moment. Then another 3 hours. It found you. The pressure from work, from the obsessive knocking, from the feeling of being constantly hunted pushed Nam to the limit. He needed a way out, a real refuge. And he thought of his family's old beach house in Vung Tau, a place he hasn't returned to since his mother passed away. The small wooden house is located alone on a promontory, a kilometer from the nearest residential area. No internet, no noisy neighbors, just the sound of waves crashing and the sea breeze whispering through wooden door frames that have faded from rain and sun. A perfect place to reset everything, he thought. The house had been vacant for 3 years since his parents no longer used it. His father once suggested selling it after his mother passed away, but Nam insisted on keeping it. Perhaps out of nostalgia, or out of something deeper, a connection to simpler times before adult life wore him down. He had forgotten the attic existed until his first night there. Nam arrived when the afternoon light was gradually fading. The October air brought with it a chilly air that forced him to turn on the old heater before even unpacking his luggage. The house smelled of forgetfulness and sea salt. Not necessarily unpleasant, but empty, as if waiting for something to fill it. He spent the evening reacquainting himself with each room, running his fingers over familiar surfaces, finding solace in the worn furniture and faded family photos. He brought enough food to last 2 weeks, enough books to last a month, and enough strong liquor to blur the lines between the two. That night, sleep came easily, the fatigue of the city still clinging to his body. That's why the sound became even more shrill. A purposeful scratching sound, right above his bed. Nam's eyes opened wide. 3:17 a.m. The red numbers of the electronic clock seemed to burn in the darkness. The scratching moved deliberately, occasionally pausing as if listening, before continuing its lazy loop across the ceiling. Something with weight. Something that knew how to avoid the rickety spots on the attic floor that he had known by heart since childhood. His heart beat faster as he stared upward, trying to follow the invisible movement. It must be weasels, he said to himself. Or perhaps the squirrels have finally found their way in. You'll check in the morning. There was no need to disturb my first real sleep in months. But when the sound turned to a slow, dragging sound, as if a heavy object was being dragged across the floor, his mouth went dry. The dragging sound lasted a few seconds, then stopped. 5 seconds of silence. Then there was the same dragging sound, this time in the opposite direction. Back and forth, purposeful, methodical. Nam lay motionless until the weak dawn light filtered through the curtains. The scratching and dragging sounds finally faded as the sunlight grew stronger. His shirt was damp with sweat despite the cold weather, and his jaw ached from clenching. He tried to justify his reaction by the disorientation of sleeping in a strange place, deliberately forgetting that he had spent 20 summers in this very room. After 3 cups of strong coffee, Nam forced himself to check. The way to the attic is by a folding ladder mounted on the ceiling of the upstairs hallway. He hadn't been up there in at least a decade. When he pulled the rope, the ladder slowly descended with a shower of dust that made him cough. The opening above looked like a black mouth opening. His flashlight cut through tiny dust particles that had danced in the air for decades as he climbed each rickety wooden step. The attic stretches the length of the house. Its ceiling is low and stuffy despite the cold autumn outside. Cardboard boxes were stacked along the walls. Old Christmas decorations, old clothes, financial records, archaeological deposits of his family's history. The first thing that caught his attention was not the sight, but the smell. A musty, sandy smell mixed with something wild underneath. Not the smell of decomposition, but the smell of something alive, something that didn't belong here. The flash of a flashlight showed that the boxes had been disturbed. Not only was it moved, but it was also searched violently. The contents spilled onto the floor. Old photo albums, his mother's wedding dress now gray with dust, his childhood toys. Nam felt an intrusion deeper than the mere concern of an animal intruder. As he went deeper into the attic, his flashlight shone on something that took his breath away. In the thick layer of dust that covered the floor, a trail of drag was clearly visible, as if something had dragged itself toward the small round window at the end of the attic. The trail was too wide for a weasel, too deliberate for a random animal. It winds in a gentle curve, disappearing behind a stack of cardboard boxes. Nam's heart pounded as he followed the trail. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up in primitive warning instinct. Behind the pile of crates, the trail ended abruptly at the wall. There are no holes, no entrances, nothing. He spent the next hour searching through the attic, looking for an entrance, but found nothing. There were no broken windows, no gaps in the roof. The only entrance was the ladder he used. He told himself that he was making too much of it, that old houses often moved and made sounds that seemed purposeful to an overburdened mind. Still, he locked the attic door before going back down, trying to handle twice to make sure it was locked tight. That evening, Nam called his father, trying to keep his voice normal when asking about the history of the house. Have there ever been problems with animal intrusion? Have any strange events happened? His answer was, as expected, very practical. Check the roof, set traps, call a local repairman if necessary. The conversation reassured him somewhat. This is just a simple problem with a simple solution. He slept better that night, thanks to fatigue and half a bottle of red wine. Until 3:17 a.m. Same exact time, same scratching sound, same dragging sound. But this time, there's something new. A light knock on the attic door. 3 separate knocks, so soft they could be mistaken for the sound of a house expanding. Except they're not. They are intentional, as if inquiring, as if asking permission. Nam's body froze. Sweat poured out on his forehead, despite the cold weather. He lay motionless, almost holding his breath, when the knocking sounded again. 3 knocks. Stop. 3 more. The rational part of his brain screamed that this was impossible. He checked the attic thoroughly. He locked the door. There's no way in or out of there without passing through you. Yet the sounds continued, now accompanied by a new feeling, a heaviness in the air, a pressure that made breathing difficult. It felt as if the house itself was shrinking around him, pushing all the oxygen out of the room. As if sensing his awareness, the knocking stopped. The silence that followed was worse, heavy with anticipation. Nam strained his ears listening for any movement, any sign of what was about to happen. Minutes passed like centuries as he stared at the ceiling, watching shadows that seemed to move independently of the faint moonlight filtering through the window. When his alarm clock suddenly restarted itself, the digits flashing 3:17, 3:17, 3:17 in a rhythm like flashing lights, Nam jumped up from the bed and grabbed his car keys. He rushed out onto the porch and spent the rest of the night in the locked car, the engine still running to keep warm, his eyes never leaving the dark windows of the house, as if waiting to see a face looking back. The morning light brings shame. He let his imagination run wild, behaving like a child afraid of the dark. He forced himself back into the house, showered and made breakfast, all while trying to construct reasonable explanations for last night's events. Old wiring may explain the clock. Wind rushing through unknown entrances could explain the sound. Stress may explain the rest. He decided to thoroughly examine the attic in daylight, armed with a better flashlight and his phone camera. He climbed the ladder again, determined to clarify the situation. What he found made the blood in his veins freeze. The boxes he had seen being ransacked yesterday had now been meticulously rearranged, stacked with precision, their contents returned to their original places. But that wasn't what made him dumbfounded. In the dust, new tracks appeared, a complete circle around the perimeter of the attic, as if something had been walking back and forth. And in the center of the attic floor, arranged deliberately, were items from various bins. His mother's silver hand mirror, his childhood teddy bear, and his father's military identification card from the Vietnam War. Objects that had deep personal meaning to him, placed in a perfect triangle. Nam staggered back, almost falling off the ladder in a panic to escape. This is no coincidence. This is not an animal. This is communication. He called the local police, trying to keep his voice steady as he reported a possible break-in. The police officer who arrived was patient but skeptical. They checked the entire house, found no signs of the door being forced open, no evidence that anyone other than him had been there. As they examined the attic together, Nam felt a wave of nausea rise. The sorted objects are gone, returning to their places in their respective bins. There was no trace of the dust, no disturbance. The policeman's expression made it clear what he was thinking. Another city man haunted by the quiet of the countryside. After the police officer left, Nam sat on the porch for hours, wondering whether he should leave or not. Pride holds him back. You won't be chased away by noises and imagination. You will find a reasonable explanation. You will regain the peace you came here to seek. That night, he prepared methodically. He set up his laptop to record the attic door. He sprinkled baby powder across the threshold to record footprints. He even placed motion sensor lights in the hallway. He then took a sleeping pill, determined to get through the night without incident. Sleeping pills work so well. When he suddenly woke up, the house was engulfed in an oppressive darkness that seemed to have physical weight. The air was thick, as if hindering his lungs from working. The digital clock read 3:17 a.m., but somehow he knew it had been showing that time for hours. Above him, the scratching sound changed. It moved faster, more agitated, creating almost linguistic patterns, a kind of Morse code of desperation. The dragging sound became rhythmic, scraping toward the attic door and then back, over and over again. Nam tried to reach for the phone, but found his arms and legs unresponsive, as if pinned to the bed by an invisible force. Panic rose as he struggled against the paralysis, his breathing becoming shallow and rapid as the pressure on his chest increased. Then, interrupting his terror, he heard it. A voice. Except it wasn't a voice. It was the sound of scratching and dragging, somehow forming words that bypassed his ears and appeared directly in his mind. I have been waiting for so long, and you finally have to back. The pressure suddenly disappeared. Nam jumped up, panting, sweat pouring out like a shower. The scratching sound stopped. In the silence that followed, he became aware of the slight creaking of the attic ladder being lowered. Slowly, on purpose. Each step opens with agonizing patience. He crawled out of bed, his feet caught in the sheets, causing him to fall to the floor. Pain shot through his elbow as it collided with the hardwood floor, but he hardly noticed. His entire focus was on the hallway, where the motion sensor light should have been on. The house was still dark, silent, waiting. On his hands and knees, he crawled to the bedroom door, pressing his ear against it. Nothing. Then a light rustling sound came closer, stopping right outside his door. His hand shook violently as he reached for the door handle. Some irrational part of him needed to face whatever was waiting on the other side. When his fingers touched the cold metal, the doorknob slowly began to turn on its own. Nam stepped back, knocking over the night lamp, leaving the room in complete darkness. The door remained closed, but the handle continued to rotate, clicking as the latch was opened. As the door began to open inward, his laptop screen suddenly lit up. The feed from the attic camera showed the movement he had heard. But what moves across the frame is not a person, nor are they animals. It is darkness that is given form, darkness with intention, flowing through the attic like painful liquid. The feed suddenly turned to static when his bedroom door was fully opened. The hallway outside is empty, but the rush of air brought with it the smell of damp earth and wildness from the attic. It carried a whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. You bring me here, in your memory, in your pain. I have waited. You remember. Again, recognition flashed with terrifying clarity. The mirror, teddy bear, military card. It's all connected to his most painful memories. His mother's death, his childhood fears, his father's wartime stories that have given him nightmares for years. Whatever haunted this house was not here when his family was together. It came to you, from your own mind, your fear, your unresolved past. He stood up on shaky legs, facing the empty doorway. What do you want? His voice cracked, almost inaudible. The pressure returned, no longer hostile, but overwhelming, as if underwater. The whisper wrapped around him. To be recognized. To be released. We are same. That understanding came. The isolation he sought was not an escape. It was a continuation of what he had been doing for years, locking away the pain, avoiding loss, creating ever stronger ghosts in the darkness. I remember, he whispered back. The pressure dissipated instantly. The stuffy atmosphere lifted. Instead, there was a profound emptiness. Not the kind of emptiness he had carried for years, but a new beginning, a space to rebuild. Nam left the beach house 3 days later, not in terror, but in peace. He spent those days opening every box in the attic, facing every memory, every loss, every fear. He cried for his mother for the first time since her funeral. He called the friends he had pushed away. He had begun the work of unlocking parts of himself that he had tried to forget. The scratching sound never returned. The dragging sound stopped. The house breathed normally again, no longer denying his presence, because he no longer denied himself. Sometimes, in his new apartment in the city, Nam still wakes up at exactly 3:17 a.m. But now, instead of fear, he felt a strange comfort in that coincidence. A reminder that some hauntings are not about ghosts or monsters, but about the ghosts we create when we turn our backs on our own light. And sometimes, in that moment between sleep and wakefulness, he whispered gratitude to whatever fragment of himself was desperate enough to drag itself across the attic floor, clawing to be heard. But the ghosts of the past, the echoes from the places we've been to, do they really disappear completely? Or do they just change shape, hide in other hidden corners of life, waiting for a moment of weakness to whisper our name in the dark night? Perhaps some doors, once opened, even just a little, can never be completely closed. Perhaps some knocks on the door will forever follow us, no matter how far we go, as a reminder of the darkness that always exists, accompanying the light in each of us. This is the end of our story tonight. Hopefully it has brought you moments that are scary enough to temporarily forget your worries and quiet enough for you to easily fall asleep. Thank you for listening. Wishing you a good night's sleep and beautiful dreams, without being disturbed by any knocking on the door at 3:17 a.m. See you again in the next stories.